Man, I did not think I was going to have to make this video this early on in the season about the Nuggets because I was certainly way more optimistic than a lot of people. But boy, was I wrong, because the Nuggets, they suck. Now, for those out there who need a little bit of background with things that are going on out in Denver, a lot of people were anticipating the potential fall off from the Nuggets, in large part due to the high turnover from the roster over the past 2 off seasons that has now left this depth chart really shallow when it comes to talent. Now, the biggest reason for the depletion of talent out in Denver has a lot to just do with the general manager and Calvin Booth having very, and I do mean very, lofty expectations from some of the younger players to not just replace but enhance some of the missing pieces over the past couple of years, in particular Christian Brown, Peyton Watson, and Julian Strawthers, and specifically said that both Peyton and Brown were not only supposed to replace someone like KCP, but in an ideal world, it's supposed to be the matchups for Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown in the inevitable Celtics matchup in the finals, which again, very, and I do mean very, lofty expectations for very young players. And because of this ideology, many people just assume that this is going to be an off year for Denver. Like, this is going to be the year where there's going to be a lot of slippage, a lot of fall off, and they weren't going to be as dominant as they were before, and it's just not going to be a team that everyone should be riding into the NBA Finals. And to those people, you are correct. Early on, it definitely seems that way, but I don't think that anyone thought it was going to be this bad. As I record this video, Denver is 1 game above 500. Offensively, they're in solid standings, but a lot of that has to do with Jokić. But on the defensive side of the floor is where they've seen a lot of the slippage. They are now hovering around slightly below league average on that side of the floor. Now, you could easily write this off to Aaron Gordon not being available early on the season, and I think that it'll be a fair assessment. And also, you can write this off to a lot of young players receiving way more reps that they probably were not prepared for, and I think that is also an unfair assessment as well. However, I think way more people are starting to come to the conclusion that this team is just overly dependent on the excellence of Jokić, and it is really hit ahead when they lost to the Washington Wizards. Now, for people out there who do not understand how crazy it is to lose to the Washington Wizards, it's because they were in the middle of a 16 game losing streak. 16 of them things. They didn't win a single game in November. Zero, nada. They just kept losing. And yet somehow, some way, the Denver Nuggets came in and they lost to them. Now, I'm pretty sure some people are going to be like, hey man, it's the NBA, man. The best of the best. Even when they're the worst of the best, they're still the best of the best around the world. So on any given night, you can still lose to them. And that is true. Also, some people who are coping, especially if you're a Nuggets fan, going to be like, hey man, we didn't have Aaron Gordon or Jamal Murray. That is also true. But the Wizards did not have Kyle Kuzma nor Alex Sarr, and it doesn't really matter who's available and not available. It's the Wizards. But to make things even worse, even with Jokić posting up a historically great stat line, you still end up losing. How great was Jokic's stat line, you may be asking? Well, Jokić just recorded 56 points, which is a career high, 16 rebounds, 8 assists, shot 58% from the field, 60% from behind the arc, and though he certainly could have shot better from the free throw line, only 69%, but still recorded 9 points from the charity stripe. That's how great Jokic's stat line was. And they still lost. Which then forces everyone to put down a coping mechanism that is excuse making and face reality, and that is, this team just sucks. It's not talented enough, and they rely way too much, and I do mean way too much, on Jokić. Because for the sheer fact that Jokić can put up those type of numbers and they are still liable to lose a game against the Washington Wizards, that's crazy. To put things into even further context in that game, like I said before, Jokić put up 56 points. He made 22 field goals, 3 3-pointers, and 9 free throws. The rest of the Denver Nuggets, everyone else that played in that game for Denver outside of Jokić, they scored 57 points, made 24 field goals, shot 43% from the field, only made 2 3-pointers, shot 10% from behind the arc, and only made 7 free throws. That's how bad this roster is. That Jokić individually damn nearly outperformed from a scoring aspect everyone else on this team. That is crazy. But oh, it gets worse. Just in case you were wondering, that's just a one-off game. We really shouldn't be using one game sample size to determine how much a team depends on one player. Bro, the on-off numbers are crazy. I thought that I was reading some of this information incorrectly when I saw it on my timeline, but no, I did my own research, and it's crazy. When Jokić is on the floor, the Denver Nuggets have an offensive rating of 124, a defensive rating of 113, which provides them a net rating of 10.5. For those who don't know how crazy those numbers are, an An offensive rating of 124 would mean that when Jokić is on the floor, it is the greatest offense the NBA has ever seen. Ever. There's never been a team with an offensive rating of 124. That's never happened. Last year's Boston Celtics was really close, but last year's Boston Celtics was the greatest offense in NBA history. So the fact that when Jokić is on the floor, they have the greatest offense ever is crazy. Now, what is their offensive rating when Jokić is off of the floor? Oh, it drops all the way down to 95, 94.9 to be exact. Defensive rating is basically staying the same, around 113. It's at 112.1, and a net rating of negative 17.2. Let that sink in. When Jokić is on the floor, they are winning those minutes by 10 points. When he's off the floor, they lose by 17, and he's only off the floor for a handful of minutes because he's having to go out there and play 35, 36. The night against the Wizards, he played 40 plus minutes, and they still end up losing those 6 to 8 to 10 minutes that he's not on the floor. That's crazy. And the reason why it's even crazier is I wanted you all to understand, like I told you earlier, the Washington Wizards, their net rating this year is a minus 15. And that's on par with the Charlotte Bobcats back in the day, the 7-win Bobcats. So that means when Jokić is off the floor, they are playing the worst basketball we might have ever seen before in NBA history. For those who are looking like, oh man, an offensive rating of 95 is pretty crazy. You're right. You're absolutely right. You know when the last time we had a team that had an offensive rating that was around 95? You guessed it. The Charlotte Bobcats. You're absolutely right. Now you may be wondering, well, Lo, when's the last time we had an offensive rating that was below 95? Well, ironically enough, it was the 2003 Denver Nuggets, the team that was tanking to get Carmelo Anthony. Before that, what was the last time we had a team that had an offensive rating below 95? The 2 years after the Last Dance Chicago Bulls. 99-2000, the year where they got rid of Jordan, Pippen, Steve Kerr, Dennis Rodman, when they literally dismantled the entire core. That team. That's how bad this roster is when Jokić isn't on the floor. So even though, yes, the Denver Nuggets are a top 10 offense, quite literally, and I don't mean to be hyperbolic, but it is 100% true. Quite literally, all of it is because of Jokic's excellence. First of all, I want to say this. I'm not going to sit here and put all the blame on these young players that are being asked to do things that, quite frankly, they're not supposed to be doing. I'm going to go straight to the source and start putting blame on players who are veterans receiving max contracts. You, my good sir, Jamal Murray, what the hell is going on, brother? What is going on? This is a conversation, a dialogue that, quite frankly, a lot of people have been putting off to the side, me included. I did not think that you were going to be this much of a bozo. It's ridiculous. I'm at a loss for words every single time I see you play. I mean, my goodness, outside of playing against the Lakers, which I don't know why that is. When you play the Lakers, you're somehow going back to all-NBA status, but everyone else, you're a straight bozo. You're a clown. What is going on with you, my brother? I gave you the benefit of the doubt, and this is what you do? Jamal Murray is averaging less than 18 points per game, which is the fewest since his sophomore season. He's shooting 42% from the field, which is the lowest since his rookie season. He's shooting 33% from behind the arc, which is the lowest in his entire career, and shooting 80% from the charity stripe, which is also the lowest in his entire career. What are you doing, my brother? Sure, you're still getting 6 assists, 4 rebounds, but I mean, you are the shot creator for this team. You are the second option, effectively. For you to be performing this poorly, it just doesn't make any sense at all. Murray's accuracy has dropped so much, so he's not even the second leading scorer on his team now. It's actually Michael Porter Jr. How is that even possible? How? And trust me, to the people out there going to tell me, oh, he's hurt, he's injured, I thoroughly understand it. I was one of the very few people who said, hey, man, I don't think that this year is going to be predicated on the excellence of MPJ or Jamal Murray rather than the young guys coming in. And I just assumed that at some point he was going to pick it up, similar to MPJ. And Michael Porter Jr. has actually been really, really great over the past like 10 to 15 games. He's picked it up since his early season woes. He looks much better, way more established. And I do assume when Aaron Gordon does come back in the fold and he's available, that their defense will be much more sound than it has been early on. But the sample size for Jamal Murray and his struggles are starting to just grow exponentially. And this is something that's very concerning because for a team that is lacking in depth, that is losing talent every single year, they cannot afford for Murray to perform this poorly. He cannot be the worst version that we effectively have seen from him since his sophomore season. They just quite literally cannot afford it. And I don't just mean that from a basketball perspective, but also financially. My goodness, I mean, brother, you just signed an extension back in September. You are now expected to make after this season $46 million and $50 million and $53 million and $57 million. So yes, Jamal Murray undeniably has to be better. Secondly, because Jamal Murray has been struggling and because Aaron Gordon has been out of the lineup early on, and even Jokić has missed 2 games, what this now has done is force this team that was already lacking in depth to have to rely even more on players that, again, are being asked to do way more early on in their career. I think that Christian Braun is exceeding a lot of people's expectations, even mine. I was fairly high on CB entering this year. I didn't think that he was going to be this good of a three-point shooter. He's shooting 43% from behind the arc, and even though the volume isn't there to replace KCP, but the sheer volume in scoring and athleticism and just being dynamic, something that I talked about and I preached pretty religiously in my handful of videos heading into the season talking about the Nuggets, I thought that he was going to be fine. But the up and downs from everyone else is really concerning, and it is hard to watch at times. Peyton Watson has his moments, especially on the defensive side of the floor, where he shows a lot, and I do mean a lot of promise. But again, when Aaron Gordon isn't there and he's being thrusted into the starting 5, you are starting to ask a lot more out of a player that, in all honesty, I just don't believe he is properly prepared for the moment that they're trying to give him. Similar things can be said about Julian. The promise and potential is very evident, but some of the opportunity just feels very premature. And you can actually say the exact same thing about Russell Westbrook as well. I think Russ on this team has his moments. He looks really great. And I've always kind of felt like Westbrook is at a point in his career where he can add a lot to a team if put in the right situation, as long as you don't overly depend on him, because just as well as he can win you some games, if you rely on him too much, he can also lose you some games as well. And I do believe the Nuggets have quickly found themselves in that realm of just trying to depend way too much on Russ in situations where they should not have to. But again, all very promising, and the construction of this roster all makes sense in many aspects, but it makes sense when certain players are afforded opportunities that should be properly allocated to them, not them being given opportunities that are just way too much for them, and it's slightly overwhelming, especially when Jokić is off the floor, and now you're just asking a bunch of players who are fairly young, not too many reps, to be led by Russell Westbrook, who can have very erratic moments, and it just falls apart pretty often, actually. It's actually pretty consistent how bad this Nuggets team is when Jokić steps off the floor. It's actually pretty embarrassing. And in terms of the Jokić aspect, it kind of is sad because we're now watching some of the greatest years in NBA history just going to waste because a team has decided to roll the dice on a bunch of young players instead of establishing more complementary veteran pieces around him to really maximize who he is as a player at the peak of his powers. And even Jokić just kind of stepped up and was vocal about this after the Washington Wizards loss, and kind of referencing lack of pay or losing pay or trying to figure out how things are going to turn around. Of course, he said this jokingly, especially when it comes to certain players not performing a certain type of way, but I think the sentiment is still there. It's still felt, and that is, this is a great opportunity for us to build some chemistry, camaraderie, get better as time progresses, especially with some of the younger players, but it doesn't feel as if like we're all on the same page, and it certainly isn't producing into the level amount of wins that we should be seeing when I'm putting up this type of numbers. And it does push the question and the narrative about him winning MVP, despite the fact that the Nuggets are more than likely going to find themselves towards the bottom of the playoff pack, and it could be potentially worse if they don't even find themselves in the playoffs by the end of the 82 games. It kind of does beg a bigger question of like, what exactly is the direction of a Denver Nuggets team that has an all-time great player on their team that's not being maximized? It really, really does suck, and I don't really think that there's any change to this anytime soon. But hey, let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. If you missed my last video on Denver Nuggets where a lot of the backstory I did go a little bit more deeper into, make sure you go check it out. It'll be some here on the screen, somewhere, I don't know, somewhere over here. And also hit the subscribe button, notification bell if you are new to the channel. I know for a fact there's a lot more traction coming to this channel, so shout out to y'all for always supporting me. And until next time, I'll see you all later. Peace.